guys, Dan Straub here, President of the Victorian Duck Hunting Association, and we'd like to welcome everyone to our second instalment of the VDHA podcast. Tonight we've got the four of us attending. We've got our Secretary Jay, our Vice President Marco, and our special guest tonight is Mark Little. And most of you guys would know Mark and his time spent in the hunting circles over the years. So thank you guys for tonight. And yeah, we've put together a few questions tonight for our podcast panel. We're having a discussion mainly based on our opinions and how we see this year's GMA process of recommendations and the dealings that us as the VDHA have had with the GMA with phone calls and emails. And we just want to discuss what we feel is the pros and cons of the recommendation process and how we see the GMA as a board and whether there's conflicts of interest. So we might start off and we'll sort of go around the screen, guys, and you know, open up the conversation with whether we feel this year in particular the GMA has been playing games with the hunting organisations and the hunting community, whether we see the CEO, Graham Ford, and the 2IC, Simon Toop, playing games, going out on their own to manipulate, so to speak, the recommendation process. So I'd like to start off there, Jay, with your opinions on that. You've had the majority of the phone conversations with Simon in particular, so we might start there and get your opinions.
Sure. So, firstly, thanks for having us and arranging this tonight, Dan. Now, we've been dealing with the GMA since last year with regards to obviously the duck season recommendations and considerations, which we obviously made our own submission. And then obviously we've been having further communications since the Arthur Rylah report was released and the subsequent increase of bag limit, and obviously the failure to increase the season as stated was sustainable within the Arthur Rylah report. But with regards to people within the board, and some of the players within the board, it's quite clear through my interactions with the GMA recently that there are that seems to be some sort of hidden agendas, and the hidden agendas are very obvious to us in the hunting community, and that is it feels like there's a strangle to reduce hunting opportunities in Victoria, particularly duck hunting. As we stated before, it's probably the easiest target. My interactions have been mixed, and they've been mixed. The reason why I say they've been mixed, it's been depending on the pressure that has been going. So I've spoken with the Director of Research, which is Simon Toop, and a few other chief scientists. I've also had interactions with Graham Ford, and one thing that I feel is very clear is a lot of the data, a lot of the submissions aren't scientific based, they're opinion pieces. I questioned directly Graham Ford, and I questioned directly Simon Toop while we were being briefed on the Arthur Rylah report by their head scientist. And I asked him to give me a clarification. I asked the scientist to give me a clarification if it was correct that it stated that we could sustain a five bird game limit over a 70-day to 90-day period. And he said it was correct. And I immediately directed my follow-up question to Graham Ford, and I said, frankly, what's going on? Why hasn't the season started? And why have we not received, or why can't it be extended beyond? The excuse I was given at that time, and I believe it still stands as their argument, was that it's too hard for the GMA to put together a season and start it now, which frankly I think is a load of BS. And then when I asked why it couldn't be extended, I was directed to Simon Tuke, who gave me a number of reasoning why birds are breeding and they're cold. I gave him a number of counter arguments, providing examples from Europe and America, and I was quickly cut off. Then they put me on mute. I asked too many questions, and they shut me off. They then said, look, we can have a chat afterwards if you'd like, which we did. And they provided us a bit more evidence supporting their argument, but there was no factual evidence. There was no, have I still got everybody here?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I just cut out for a bit. There was no factual evidence they provided. There was just their, this is what we did in 1958, and because we did it because of this. But there was no actual, I said to him, well, where's the scientific argument debate on the basis that birds are more vulnerable in winter, and that's the reason we can't hunt there. He couldn't provide that to me. So from there, one thing that was very interesting was immediately that day, there were changes on the GMA website following those questions that we asked. And the GMA website changed the dates of the breeding periods as soon as we asked those questions. And then, not only that, we received, after our follow-up argument, we received an email from the Director of Research, and he CC'd, not just me, but absolutely everybody, so all the antis and all that, and he said, this is my argument why we can't have a season past the Queen's birthday. In my view, that was a tactical approach to fire up the antis who had been a bit quiet. So if you want to ask me whether I think there's games being played, absolutely. That's absolutely, there's no doubt about it. You also look at the fact that in our last podcast, Dan mentioned that there was rumours that recently there was there was a request from the GMA officers to hand in their licenses to stop any conflict of interest. Now we were very clear that there was a rumour. We have no facts to that. And we asked if anybody knew any information to let us know. A few nights later, we received an email from Graham Ford at, I think it might have been 3 a.m. in the morning, saying, I don't know where you got your information from, but I wouldn't trust you. To give me gambling advice or something along those lines. Frankly, if you ask me, that's what somebody does when they're pissed 3 o'clock in the morning and they want to send off an angry rant. More than happy to share the email. That's for me.
Thanks, Jay. There was a lot in that response, and obviously that's how you see it, and you have had the contact and you've attended the Zoom meetings at the request of the GMA, and we thank you for that. Marco, do you have anything to add to that? As as a hunter, you've been involved in the process, but how do you think other hunters from the outside looking in have seen the GMA's response and the way that they've gone about the toing and throwing over the past months?
Well, since GMA was formed or put in place, I can honestly say I haven't seen one positive one positive post. I've seen no support for hunting whatsoever. Yes, sure, they bring out stuff about, deer hunting and we're patrolling, but it seems to me that everything I've seen about GMA is always more about compliance rather than game management. And I've had a little bit of personal dealings with them over protesters issue, and they did not support us one bit. They basically said that they had free rein to do what they liked, and that we didn't have a say, even though the laws are there to protect hunters being hindered. I had issues with protesters a couple of years back. GMA have never, ever supported hunters in any shape, way or form. Recent events with the way they have manipulated the submissions to the minister just adds fuel to the fire. They actually aren't a group of people that are, in my opinion, they're not pro-hunting at all. As Jay said, they actually seem to want to put hurdles in front of us every way they can, and that's with game season lengths and game season bag limits. And I just don't think they are an organisation that are looking after hunting at all.
Thanks, Marco. Mark, you've got some opinions. What is your thoughts on mainly this season's recommendation process? How you've seen it?
Before I talk about that, what Marco said is correct. I was a board member for 8 years. I'm no longer a board member. If I could just talk a little bit of history about how the GMA was formed.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Thanks,
all right.
Mark. That's excellent. Thank you.
The GMA, the formation of the GMA was driven by hunting organisations and it's virtually sponsored by Peter Walsh, the National Party leader. Election was coming up. They rushed through the legislation to establish the Game Management Authority, and it was going to be the New Zealand model, which we'd all love. There was things like all the state game reserves, the resources would be transferred from Parks Victoria to the GMA. They would actually be managed. It was all about game management, which, is what we dreamed of, what we fought hard for. Then the city-based Liberals were a bit scared of the Greens in their electorate. So to get the legislation through before the next election, it was watered down. The resources didn't come to manage state game reserves, and it was more about, to get it through in time, it became less about game management and more about an authority we can hand off, someone to blame, if that were. Certainly, but those early days, the board was formed. We had people like Rod Drew, Roger Hallam, who was a staunch advocate of hunting, was the chair. I was involved, and Alan, I've lost his name, but he was on the Hunting Advisory Committee for years. We were all part of the board. It was a 9-member board under a pro-hunting chair, and all the other board members, there was no one you would say was anti-hunting. Then it was in place. It started to be very under-resourced, and the Labor government was elected. Now, Daniel Andrews was probably this one that said duck hunting will not be banned, of all people. But there was other factions within the Labor Party that were, well, you know, from their state conferences how they've put up every year to ban duck hunting. So they were, under the First Minister, they were prepared to keep going, let the GMA run. Rangi Marshes occurred. The media blew it out of proportion. The antis blew it out of proportion. A lot of people did the wrong thing and got carried away. The Labor Party minister suddenly went from trusting the GMA to regulate to being very critical of them. And a report, the Pegasus report, was requested not by the GMA, but by the minister. I think if you look through that report, you can pick holes in it everywhere. But because it was from the minister and because the minister controlled the GMA, it had to be implemented, the recommendations from it. And I think out of the 19 recommendations, 18 of them were implemented. So you've suddenly gone, the direction from above has gone from being game management and game regulation and compliance to being pure regulation and compliance. Anything that we would call game management were things that were included in the Sustainable Hunting Action Plan, and it was pretty minimal and there wasn't the resources to do it. So what has happened, the board has evolved. The people on, I don't know half the people on the current board, I knew the others. Well, the people there are fairly astute decision makers, but they can only make decisions on the advice they're provided with. Fortunately, people like myself, Rod Drew, Roger Hallam could question the information that was being provided because we had that knowledge. And, you know, I think the board had lots of battles and discussions and so on to try and get the best outcome. And we had hunters in the back of our mind. This is, you know, very eclectic, this mix, but the other thing is, it has never been my opinion that anti-hunting organisations should be considered stakeholders. Certainly, you could say you ignore them at your own peril because they can have a huge amount of influence. But the primary stakeholder is the hunter that forks out their money to buy a game licence. And that seems to be lost in the whole scheme of things. The other area, communication, I believe, from the GMA is atrocious. If you come out and let's use the humane dispatch of ducks program as an example. None of us want to see cruelty to any birds or animals. We all want to dispatch the game humanely. We also have to use some common sense in that. And that was a knee-jerk reaction in response to footage of a duck hunter swinging a duck by the neck in front of a protester. And they're good at videotaping things, which went straight to the minister. Now, that's fine. So, all right, let's educate the hunters, but do it with the hunters. It's change management 101. Don't just suddenly come out and say, here is how you will dispatch ducks and this is the penalty. You do it with your major stakeholder, your primary stakeholder, the hunters. Do it with them. Get them on sport to spread the word amongst other hunters by whatever means they can. I don't think any of us really like being told what to do, but if it's explained, and it's the right thing to do, we'll get behind it and we'll promote whatever it is. That's just one example. Facebook is the other thing. Every time I see a GMA post, it's got game management authority across the top, and 75% of them are some sort of warnings not to do something wrong. You compare that to the Victorian Fishing Authority site. They have pictures of people out enjoying themselves. The whole thing about, 3 positives to every negative. Why not try that? Why, they're all, I believe their organisational reputation is in tatters for a number of reasons. Part of it is that communicating. If they come out and said, we've got all the data we can, we're waiting for more, but it looks like, looking at southeastern Australia, we can have no duck season. If they can come up front and say that, Hunters will be the first one behind it. We don't want all the ducks to be wiped out, but instead they come in and say, you will shoot 2 ducks. Where's the communication of the rationale behind that? I spoke with the minister herself at the launch of the traditional owners game management strategy, and I explained things. People weren't happy. I wasn't happy, and in a respectful manner. And she said, this year highlights the lack of data and evidence, and we want to make sure that won't happen again. But it was too late. All right, yeah, they kicked it up to 5 birds. They could have done a lot more. If there's a reason why we can only have 5 birds in 20 days, don't feed us shit and tell us it's chocolates. Come up front. Hunters are responsible people, 99.9%, and do it that way. That communication is atrocious. There's also so much. There's a lot we'll never know about. We'd love to know. We'd love to know if there's been discussions or pressure put on by government to the GMA or individuals within GMA. We'd like to know if there was pressure put on from DELP. We'd like to know what the discussions were in the boardroom that the CEO would sign off on it. We'd like to know if they didn't have enough data, what they did to get it. Unfortunately, we'll probably never find out those things, but there should be aspects of it they should be able to share. Part of their vision is accountability. I don't see too much accountability. Yeah, they're being let down in so many ways. I think rumours start. The current board, I'm unaware of anyone on there that is anti-hunting. There's a few people that are very pro-hunting. Most of the others are professional people that have a certain amount of skills in certain areas. I'd love to stack the board with hunting and make it all about the hunters and make it all about game management, which was probably the original vision when it was put up. I know there's one person on the board, I think they have an animal welfare background, but I believe that person is very pro-hunting, that she went pig hunting with her brothers from the time she was a kid. Her primary interest in animal welfare is with companion animals, dogs and cats and budgerigars and things. So, it's easy to look at a person's qualifications or biography and say they'll be against us. You've got to expect that a government-appointed board, there will be a few favourites put in there. It's wrong, but it would happen. It happened with the first board with people that were pro-Liberal National Party gaining spots. It should be on merit and it should cover a balance of experiences and knowledge, and I think that could well be there. I know the chair of the board really well. He's a really good administrator. He is a hunter, and he's done a lot for hunters that we'll never be able to find out about. But the question I ask, if they've got paid staff who are, and they're well-paid staff, who are making recommendations to the board that do not allow the board to make an informed decision, how is that not being addressed by the board? How can it, is there some hiccup that the board's being hamstrung? Just what interference is there? What is the role, is DELP the fly in the ointment with the Department of Environment with, a fairly green outlook, with a junior minister in the agricultural portfolio where the GMA comes under? All these things we don't know, and I'm buggered if I know how you get it. Freedom of information will get you so far. Sorry, you're going to...
I'm just going to have to jump in, Mark, and we're going to have to take a quick break. And we've got a lot more to discuss on some key points you've brought up now, which leads us into a few other questions. And we're just going to take a quick break, guys, and we'll be back very soon. Okay, welcome back. We've had a pretty informative and in-depth discussion so far on the VDHA podcast. We've been discussing whether there's been game playing within the GMA, and we've had a bit of an insight into how the GMA was formed and how they've changed over the years with different government influences. The next topic we wanted to discuss this evening, and I'll throw this out to Jay first, and then we'll go to Mark. We've had a number of conversations with the GMA, and we've also had conversations with the Ag Minister herself, Maryanne Thomas. And we originally seen in the GMA's recommendations, what I read back in February was a lot of cutting and pasting from the Kingsford Eastern Waterfowl Survey that was used as a big portion of the recommendation period. We all knew back in November, December of 2020 that there was an independent survey of wetlands and bird numbers that the GMA were conducting, and they had appointed the Arthur Rylah Institute to administer that survey. Now, there was lots of talk about where is this survey. With conversations I've had with the GMA chief scientists, I probably won't divulge his name, but the conversations we had were, the information isn't ready yet, the information's still coming. Now, is it, well, this is sort of my opinion, but is there much truth in whether that report was withheld back in January, or whether it still was being put together, as late as March, like we've seen? And what was presented originally to the Agricultural Minister, and she made a call on what was presented to her, and then was very upset and disappointed that the wool had been pulled over her eyes somewhat. And then the second report from the Arthur Rylah come out, giving us the increase in our bag. What are your thoughts there, Jay? And I know it's a pretty involved question. I don't know how really to simplify it. I just wanted to give a bit of background.
Sure. Look, I think, unfortunately, Maryanne Thomas has been handed a poison chalice. Okay, it's quite clear from what I've seen going on, my involvement, and just as a hunter in general on the outside and watching what's going on, is that there has clearly been whether an intentional or a mistake, but there's clearly been a miscommunication from the GMA to the minister, and it's made the minister look like a fool. And the people that are directly, obviously, responsible for this is the GMA, because they ultimately provide the advice to the minister. So the GMA in the current situation provided a recommendation of 5 birds, despite there being science to say that it'd be sustainable to have a 70 to 90-day season. For the minister to go against the GMA's advice, it's got to be extraordinary, right? So the fact that we got to lift the 5 birds is an amazing result, but it highlights where the problem is, and the problem is at the GMA. Now, when we had our not considerations meeting, but when we had the follow-up meeting regarding the Arthur Rylah report, again, I made a series of questions to the GMA with regards to why the minister, why they have only recommended to the minister five birds, right? And I asked the director of research, and I was very surprised by the response that I got. The response that I got was that as the director of research advised me that he's on our side, that he is a hunter, and that duck hunters have been shortchanged, and that the result is because the board made a decision to be conservative. I said to him, but didn't you provide the advice to the board? And he said, oh, it's not as clear as that. They had that information available to them. So my question is, if anybody can give me an answer, is who provides the advice to the board? And does the board make decisions based solely on the advice of their research staff and all that sort of stuff and their officials, or do they sift that data and sit together and go, okay, let's be a little bit conservative here, or let's do that? What goes on? Because in my view, a board, I've been worked for a number of organisations in the past, and a board usually relies on the advice of their chief staff. So it's confusing for me to see a staffer really just handball the entire blame to the board. So it'd be an interesting question if I can get answered.
Yeah, that would be interesting, and we don't want to put the pressure on Mark, but if you've got any insight, you've been through that process, and what have you seen differ for the 2021 recommendations to what you've seen in the past, if you can divulge that information? And do you think there had been some misleading information back and forth to the minister regarding the Arthur Rylah report and its timeline in getting released to the public?
Yeah, as I said before, there's so many unknowns, and I don't know how it's possible to get that information. How hard did the GMA try to get that information before, like the board or their employers, to get that information prior to making recommendations around the duck season? Was it obstruction by another department or another minister? And I say that because it can happen. When the adaptive harvest, the scientists, the experts met to determine the adaptive harvest model, that was while GMA I know, requested the outcomes of that. To my knowledge, it's still never been released to them. Now, that's a document that is going to determine our duck seasons in the future, yet alone having any consultation. Or was it released to certain people who haven't passed it on for whatever reason? There's so many unknowns which can only make us suspicious, and that's that accountability, that transparency that's not there. I don't see any excuse why there wasn't more data. I find it an insult that Kingsford survey, which was not intended, and Kingsford admits it himself, to be used to determine duck seasons.
Hey, Mark, just
Yeah.
quickly, I mentioned that in the Arthur Rylah considerations that the Kingsford report was not designed to determine the seasonal recommendations, and I quoted Kingsford himself. I actually had the articles with me, and Simon Toot said, "I don't know where this information came from." He said it's a rumor. He said what I said was BS, and that it was intended for setting the season. Apparently, we were at logs of heads. We're at heads there, but just thought I'd let you know that.
Yeah, maybe you can direct him to the report to the New South Wales government on duck hunting, completed by Richard Kingsford and Graham Hall, I think it was the other professor, which clearly states it. And he would be full aware of it. And
yeah, absolutely.
That's what we don't need. We want to work with GMA to get the best outcome for hunters, but it's got to be both ways. You know, there is a huge volunteer force out there of hunters that would help with conservation, would help with bird numbers, help establish things. GMA have used none of it. Instead, they're dictating what should happen around regulations and so on. The input hunters have through their organisations to the season determination meetings, in my opinion, you may as well not put it in if it's going to be ignored. When I'd assume the anti-hunters put in their recommendations, I think that's ignored just as much as what the hunting recommendations. I think it's already virtually set in stone. What I do question, the report to the board, to the minister, which I think is public now, was written in such a way that it would justify a 2-bird shortened season. Give me the same data, I'll write you a professional report that says quite the opposite. It should be a full bag, full season, shovelers on the list, the lot. It's how it's written. There was also inaccuracies that have been pointed out to the minister, and I'm sure the minister's embarrassed by things such as where Kingsford said there's been a significant increase in wetland habitat, or something like 27%, and the report says there's been somewhat of an increase in wetland habitat. Now, significant and somewhat are two different things. That is, as you said earlier, opinion. And I'm not a wildlife scientist. And well, you put it to my field. I work with people involved in the justice system. Now, I've got a good knowledge of the justice system. I've got some qualifications. But if you want to talk the finer points of law and justice, you get a barrister, someone that is an expert. I don't believe they have the level of expertise doing their science and their research that is needed. We should have a Graham Webb or a Graham Hall doing it. And I think that I haven't seen the critique of the documents that was put forward by Graham Webb. I can't remember which one,
Yeah,
Graham
Graham
Hall,
Webb.
one or the other. But you know, I would imagine that would be fairly scathing if, and the I would imagine the board, the minister, whoever should demand a level of expertise if they're going to make informed decisions. So, yeah, there's lots of suspicions, lots of things we don't know. We don't know what influence, you know, we know what you've got, is that waving to talk to me, Jay? Or?
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
a quick comment on that. So when we were doing the considerations, as you would recall, there was a big delay in the GMA making an announcement, and we were advised the reason the delay on the announcement was because they were waiting on the helicopter data, and that was available to them initially. The preliminary data was initially available to them in January. So in January, they had raw data that suggested a really favourable conditions, right? But because it was draft, they never handed that data off to the minister, and they never made it public. And they also then decided to make a decision completely ignoring that raw data. Despite it not being released, the preliminary data that they had showed significant signs. And one of the things that I did question, I said, if you know that you've got some extraordinarily, the potential for this data that you have would suggest that the habitat and the bird life is completely, the contrast is completely different to what your report from the, what's his name? The Kingsford report. If it's completely different, don't you think you perhaps should have either held off on making an announcement until that information was available and clear? I'm sure the hunting community would have understood that if you said we've got some potentially good data and we want to make sure that we are right before we make an announcement, or B, find that balance of in between where they can say, all right, look, this data is not available, but it looks much more favourable than the Kingsford data. But maybe we should find a balance between the Kingsford data and the raw Arthur Rylah data, and make a decision like that. They had a lot of options, but at the end of the day, they chose completely to ignore the preliminary Arthur Rylah data, and they also chose not to inform the minister that there was potentially really good data that would suggest that their recommendation is completely flawed.
Well, that's a great point, and I was just going to sort of move on there. Do you have another quick comment, Mark, on that topic before we go to our next question, which sort of is a lead on from what we've been discussing just now? So jump in if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just say this: when a board makes a decision, or when the scientists, for want of a better word, provide a document, it's got to be defensible. And what Jay was talking about, that if they had preliminary information and they chose to ignore it, that is not defensible. Now, how you go holding them to account is different. I'm sure conversations you and others have had with the minister would certainly put pressure on them, but that's not going to help us for this year. You know, maybe we've seen with no closures yet that they're scared to cause more damage to what's left of their reputation.
I had a similar conversation with a fellow hunter today, and that's their synopsis on the GMA's position on not closing any wetlands, is that, to use the phrase, they're one punch away from a knockout.
Yeah. I,
No.
I don't. I think we have to be careful, and I've been guilty of it myself, being very critical of the GMA and getting in different newspapers and so on, putting my 2 bobs worth in. What we want is a GMA to be like the VFA, operate the same way, and that was changes how they operate was put before Parliament by Daniel Young years ago and was defeated.
That's right.
Unfortunately. The big thing, if we, I know Marco probably say, well, it couldn't be any worse than what it is, but if it transferred back to the government, it could go to Department of Environment, and if that was the case, I think we'd be stuck.
Yeah, you'd have Lily D'Ambrosio's hands all over it.
Yeah, and the loony left backers from their factions in the Labor Party. So what we've got to do is change what we've got, and I think the pressure that's been put on by yourselves and other organisations has been an excellent first step. It hasn't helped us get many more birds this year or a decent length season, but it's a great first step. And, you know, we'll have to see how it goes from here, but we're going to talk about that later, I think, anyway.
Yeah, that's, you know, leading into the next question, and it's sort of a good point to lead off on that. And I'm sorry, I've just lost my screen, so apologies there. Now, we've spoken about we might not be able to regain much for this season, but I think we've done a great work in setting a precedence for future seasons. And I want to ask Marco his opinion on whether you think the recommendation process is a flawed process. And I know we sort of briefly touched on it there with Mark's comments about, well, where does it go from here? Does it go back to the government, which isn't probably the best idea? Now, we've seen the pressure put on the GMA on Tuesday when the VDHA fully supported the Field and Game and the SSAA in not attending a GMA scheduled bird count and wetland closure meeting as a protest, I suppose you could call it, and saying, no, we think this is a flawed process, we don't want to take part. Now, there's also been that pressure, and that's been brought up, whether there should be a full boycott on the recommendation process. What are your thoughts on the process itself, Marco, and whether, you know, it is time that the organisations do stand up and say, we don't want to be involved with this?
All these recommendations and all that, you know, it can get quite boggy. You know, when you bog a four-wheel drive and then you try and get out and it just keeps getting more bogged. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of theories, there's a lot of assumptions, there's a lot of opinions. Let's go back, just simplify it, okay? Australia, massive, massive, massive land. Population, zilch compared to so many other countries. Available wetlands, unlimited, okay? Our ducks migrate. They go from once, they follow the water, okay? We have dry years, we have wet years. This year's been an exceptionally good year for duck population and breeding. Hunters are the best authority how that all works. Organisations like Field and Game have been involved in this process for decades. It's, you know, you can see the politics over the years has crept in and complicated a very, very simple process that's worked for so many years. I've been hunting since I was 12 years old. I've been duck hunting since I was 12 years old. I haven't seen any significant drop in numbers. If it's dry, our ducks migrate to other states. Victoria, we've experienced years when, right on duck season, there was a lot of birds in Victoria, and then you get a flood up north, and overnight our ducks migrate, and then they come back mid-season. So all this very, very, very simple statistics and data has been complicated by politics. That's all it is. All this is a political game. Different parties wanting votes, pressure by the Greens, blah, blah, blah. The reality of it is hunting is sustainable. It's been proven beyond doubt. Okay? We are a group of people that are very, very much discriminated against. As soon as a small minority of hunters do the wrong thing, it's highlighted. There's people getting caught doing the wrong thing fishing every week. It's never made public. They're just given fines. There's not a big deal. There's no protests about fishing infringements and people abusing fishing. Yet, the government supports fishing. It promotes releasing, restocking lakes, restocking rivers. It's just become a political game. And that's the sadness of this whole thing. There's no significant or transparency or valid reason why we should be treated the way we are. It's just we are subject of a political game, and we're the ones that have been discriminated against. That's the way I see it. I'm an old school hunter. I've been hunting since I was 12. I'm 58 now. I've been hunting for 46 years. Hunting is what it is. As I said, there's good seasons and there's bad seasons. Hunters are the ones that want to protect our game more than anybody else. All these anti-hunting organisations, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. We do. Organisations like Field and Game have been involved in nest boxes and conservation. You don't see any anti-hunting organisation step up to that. We are the ones that preserve our resources so that we can then harvest game. It works like that all over the world. Unfortunately, in Australia, it's worldwide, but at this point, it's just a political game. And at the moment, we are the pawn. That's it. That's my say on it.
Yeah, that's a pretty relevant and to the point. You simplify the process. The data is there. It's just got to be utilised and put forward without this game playing, manipulation, and editing. Like Mark pointed out, that 2 or 3 different words can mean all the difference in how a document is delivered and how it's interpreted. And why is that happening? We'll stick with you, Marco. We've only got 8 minutes left before the end of our session tonight. We'll go around the screen quickly on how do you think we can move forward from this? What lobbyist actions can the VDHA, for one, the hunting community, and a joint collaboration between the hunting organisations do to move forward in making this a more simplified process, make it a more transparent process, and have that data available directly from the scientists without the interference in between?
I think the most positive outcome of this year has been that for the first time in my lifetime that I can remember since I've been hunting, hunting organisations have come together. They've applied pressure. where it's been needed or deserved, and we've got a result. The way we've been able, not us as in the VDHA, but a combined effort by everybody, the way hunters have been able to turn around the 2 bird bag limit to shift it to 5, I don't believe that a lot of people understand how big a deal that is. I mean, I've never ever experienced such a win on the hunter's point of view. And it's only because I think we've applied the pressure. And I think moving forward, we have to play the game that it seems the politicians listen to, and that's to be vocal, that's to put the pressure on the same way the antis do it. We have to keep the pressure on moving forward. Hunters, everybody combined, because if we don't, we're going to lose everything.
Yeah, no, very good, Marco. Mark, you've got some comments there. Quickly.
Yep. I'll have to be quick. Look, if you, where to from here, if you put a post on Facebook saying, what can we do to change the situation, you would get 100 responses, and every one of them would be good responses. It's not a matter of ideas, it's a matter of being able to implement them. My view is that the organisations should get together. Nothing will happen unless it happens in a planned manner. All the anti-organisations work together, they plan who's going to do what, who's going to do, you know, is Regional Victorians going to do this letter, whatever. It needs to happen in a planned manner and then from there, there'll be tasks. And that's where you set up someone to lead that, probably someone from one of the organisations to lead it. They have a group under them to implement it. They have timelines and do it that way. So we're attacking and trying to bring about change from multiple fronts. We can reclaim the moral high ground. We can influence government. We can influence the media, but it's not going to happen in an ad hoc manner, and it's not going to happen with organisations not collaborating. Still have your organisations. I think it's terrific. VDHA's come along and is providing a different approach. You know, but I think it's got to be that collaborative effort between organisations, the right people. Even if you've got to handpick them, invite them to be there, develop a plan. People, subgroups responsible for just one section of a plan with the right people in there to get things happening, and timelines. That's the other thing. Too many good ideas, they never ever get implemented. You know.
No, that's some great advice there, Mark. Jay, what are your thoughts there moving forward? We've got a couple of minutes there, and then we're going to close off for tonight. So it would be interesting to get you to wind out the evening for us.
No worries, mate. And look, firstly, I absolutely agree with both what Mark and Marco both just said. The way forward is to have a collective approach, right? And there's two real main things that we need to do. Is we need to be loud, and we need to stick together. Okay. One thing that we saw over the past 2 weeks with what's going with the increase in bag limit and the Arthur Island report and all those shenanigans was there was real and direct communication with the VDHA, with the Field and Game, the SSAA and all the other organisations. We played our part, we let them do their part and others do their part. That worked well. And for us to continue to make strides and kick goals and get wins, we need to be on the forefront and we need to work together. And one thing we also need to do, and which is absolutely important, is that when the season ends this year, it doesn't mean our campaign stops. We need to keep on going. For me, our campaign has already started and it's not going to end until we got some solid grounds and solid promises from the government. And we need to ensure that we want to ensure that we know that next year and the year after that and the year after that, we know that our kids and our tradition is going to continue as long as nature continues to provide for us. And there's not going to be an interference of do-gooders or whatever you want to call them, trying to discriminate against our way of life. So at the end of the day, to summarize, to cap off, we need to stay united as hunters, the hunting organizations, and not just hunting organizations, but bush user groups. So like fishing groups, forward drive groups, all those things, we need to stick together because, as we stated before, duck hunting is the first domino. We've seen people like Animals Australia and the RSPCA attack fishing, attack access to the bush. They take on duck hunting right now because we're the easy target. We're topical, we're relevant. If duck hunting is toppled over, kiss goodbye to the rest of hunting for Australia. So time to dig in, everybody.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jay. That has been a very informative discussion. Mark, just one more thing.
Yeah, just quickly. From what I can see, the organisations are working their bums off, especially this year. What Jay said about this being, the end of this year's campaign, it's the start of years ahead of us.
Yeah.
But remember, we're working against the bureaucracy, and I'm not just talking about the GMA, that are survivors. They're like cockroaches, they'll survive a nuclear war. And we have to challenge everything they do, but not just the organisations. Every hunter out there, their family members, everyone they can influence has to be involved in bringing about change. The organisations provide the leadership and the planning. The hunters support those organisations. Yeah, I think it's critical. The organisations, all organisations need to collaborate and provide the leadership, and every hunter, their families, their friends, anyone they can influence, need to be involved in implementing those plans if we're to bring about change. We're all fired up at the moment with the poor duck season announcement. You've got to maintain that rage, be respectful, but do it in a planned manner. Get behind the organisations. They should provide the leadership. We need to provide the manpower. That's not politically correct, is it? The person power to get it happening. And yeah, it's going to be a battle, but we can win.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point to finish on there, Mark. We've covered some pretty hot topics this evening, and again, we'd have to just reiterate that these are our opinions. We've got some informed opinions on a lot of the discussion we've had, but again, this is how we've seen it as the VDHA, and we'd just like to thank again Jay for your input tonight. Marco, we've actually lost your screen, mate. We had a little bit of a glitch, but thank you, Marco. And thanks to our special guest tonight, Mark, for your input and in-depth knowledge of hunting and opinions on how we can all move forward. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This has been the second instalment of our VDHA podcast, and we hope to have further instalments in the very near future. So thanks, guys, and happy hunting this duck season.